Okay, we're here. It's 4 o'clock. It's Wednesday. It must be Hawaii, the state of clean energy. We are so delighted to be here every Wednesday. If you want to send us a message, you know, or a question or anything, use Twitter. Tweet us at ThinkTech Hi, H-I, okay? We like that. We'll answer your question. And our principal guest, Joel Swisher, will make a special effort to answer your question. He is with the Institute for Energy Studies and Research. Huh?
No, studies.
Just study.
Just studies, okay. Joel, say hello.
Hi, how's it going, Jay?
Thank you.
Nice to see you all. Aloha.
And of course, we have co-hosts here tonight. We have Sharon Moriwaki, say hi.
Hi.
I knew you'd say that. And Ray Starling.
Hello.
All right. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the Megawatt Moment. We have Carolyn Carl here with us today. Talk about the Easy Window program. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Tell us everything about this program.
Well, you know, Hawaii Energy is here to help residents and businesses save money on their electric bills by a series of great programs. The one I want to share today, as it's getting pretty hot out, is our window AC trade-up. So we are now offering $50 for qualified window ACs, provided that you surrender your old unit. So it's really easy to participate. You just go pick out a qualified unit at a local retailer, so meaning it has 11.2 EER or higher, and then give us a call and we'll come pick up your old one and we'll send you a check for $50.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. That's another one of those 2 o'clock in the morning ideas. I know. You guys have an incredible number of creative ideas. So let's offer Joel Swisher, our principal suspect, you know, an opportunity to cross-examine. Joel?
I'm ready.
Well, what I want to know is, do we take the old air conditioners out back and shoot them when we replace them with these nice new ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, we offer pickup, so we just need to have the units deposited outside the house, and then we come in with a hauler and make sure that all the parts are properly recycled, and so refrigerant doesn't end up in a landfill. All of the copper, other white goods are, you know, broken down and then resold. So it's full recycling, which is really important, you know, because as we start to encourage people to upgrade, we want to be sure that the other ones just don't end up in another window using more electricity.
Yeah. Well, I suppose you could move it around from window to window and get $50 over and over again. Yeah?
Well, it's a 1-for-1, so
Okay.
Yeah.
Just checking.
You got to get rid of one in order to get the rebate.
Okay. Sharon, your turn.
Is it open for everybody? I mean, who can qualify for
So
this?
right now we're working with a number of local retailers, and their applications are on site there. And so all ratepayers in Hawaii, Honolulu, and Maui counties, which is our area served, can qualify, residential ratepayers. And there's a pretty simple application. If you have any questions about whether or not you qualify, you're more than welcome to give us a call at 537-5577.
What was that again?
537-5577.
I knew you'd say that.
Yeah.
Sounds like one of those movie numbers.
Oh yeah, we picked that one out especially. So
Magnum PI or something.
yeah, so it is easy to participate, and we just, you know, we're really looking as we come into summer to get people thinking about how much they can save by upgrading, and with the rebate it really brings down the cost. So we estimate that you can save about $70 a year if you just by trading up, you know, to a newer, more efficient unit.
Interesting. Ray, do you want to add something to that?
Well, I just encourage people to go to our website if they have any questions whatsoever about energy efficiency or rebates that might be available for other types of appliances and other things that we do with the money that comes from the ratepayers. So Caroline is our residential and transformational director, and she can answer any question you have about residential efforts to save energy. So
Yep.
we're happy to have her with us today, and her folks do quite a bit for the state.
Yes, and quite a bit for ThinkTech and the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. But let me say I'm envious in one significant way. I'm envious of your title, Carolyn.
Oh.
Director of Transformation. Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of a mouthful, but I've gotten used to
Works
it.
well. Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you
Carl.
so much.
Tell us again the website address.
HawaiiEnergy.com, and you can actually follow us on Twitter at MyHawaiiEnergy. So,
Ooh.
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Carolyn.
Okay, we're going to get on to the principal subject of our show. It's Joel Swisher, Institute for Energy Studies, out of where?
Washington.
At Western Washington.
Western
University.
Washington University. What city is that?
That's in Bellingham.
Bellingham, okay. And so I guess the first order of business, Joel, is why are you here?
Because you
Look
invited
at the
him.
weather report, Jay, in Seattle versus here. Well, I'm doing some work with the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, which Sharon is associated with, and we're having a members and stakeholders meeting on Monday, talking about a fairly geeky topic of valuing renewable energy resources for the purpose of potentially figuring out newer, different ways to compensate owners of renewable sources, contributing to the Hawaii energy supply. And Hawaii, of course, has among the highest shares of their energy supply here from renewables compared to anywhere just about.
Is this one of the principal things you do, this kind of examination?
Well, it's something that I've been involved with over a long period of time. I used to be the managing director at Rocky Mountain Institute, which is a fairly well-known think
Yes,
tank
it is.
in
Held
Colorado.
in very high regard, very well admired.
Well, we're all legends in our own mind,
I
you
guess
know,
so.
as you might say.
And more.
But this question of what are renewable resources worth, what is the value of energy efficiency or negawatts, such as what Carolyn was just talking about, and distributed resources, those that generate energy near or at the point of consumption. It's a little bit different from the conventional model of energy generation, particularly on the mainland where we have large power plants, you know, out far away from load centers, and the energy comes via transmission lines, and we sort of know how to value that, but the trade-offs involved in distributed and renewable resources are a little more complicated, maybe a little more interesting, but we spend a lot of time trying to pencil that out.
And it's certainly interesting here. You know, I mean, so many things are on the table right now because of our deal with NextEra. And, you know, your evaluation process and, you know, the ability to make valuations of these elements is extremely important to examine some of these possibilities that are on the table.
Well, this is why we asked Joel to come here and do the study and look at across the country, or actually across the world, to look at various models for valuing, so that we could get some idea of how to do that here when we start looking at going to 100% renewable now in 2045. I sent you that bill.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't usually do this, but I think in this case it's worthwhile qualifying the witness.
Now you're raising the stakes here. I'm not sure that's fair. at this
Whoa,
late stage.
what did he say? Okay, Joel Swisher is the director of the Institute for Energy Studies and research professor, research professor of environmental science at Huxley College of the Environment in Western Washington University, which is near Bellingham. Ask me how I know that. Okay, and he's also an independent consultant with over 30 years. You said it was a long time, but I didn't realize it was that long.
Great, so.
30 years experience in research and consulting on clean energy technology. Did they have it then?
Well, you know, my first job in this business was the summer of 1977. I was an undergrad.
I wasn't even born.
And Governor Jerry Brown, you know Governor Jerry Brown? He was governor then too.
Keeps coming back.
And he ordered all the
Recycled.
California departments to investigate putting solar energy on their facilities. And I got an internship looking
Oh, wow.
at way stations and district offices and recommending how they could incorporate solar at that time. So, you know, I have to say I've been doing this since before it was cool, but I was never cool, so I guess it's not really a
Oh, well, you're cool to us, Joel. Okay, and Director of Technical Services and Chief Technology Officer for
Camco.
Camco International. Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça?
Well, Camco is a company that develops and sells carbon offsets. And a carbon offset is a way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emissions, or even methane emissions, that is to say, mitigating climate change, in markets where those, the credit for those reductions is tradable. And so, for example, they might do a project in the United States, or maybe even one in China, that reduces, let's say, methane emissions from dairies, from coal mines, from landfills, from any one of those things, and through a very rigorous set of calculations, figure out what the value of that is and sell those credits to maybe power companies who are trying to reduce their emissions and find that more cost effective than an incremental reduction in their own. So it's a part of the international or regional carbon market, so to say.
It's markets, so we will examine that with you. Okay, and as you mentioned before, you were the managing director of research and consulting at Rocky Mountain Institute, where you created the concept of the smart garage. Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça?
Well, the smart garage was actually just kind of a quip that was incorporated into a talk one day out at Stanford. And the idea at the time, and this is going back maybe 12 years ago, people were talking about, you know, we're going to have the smart grid, we're going to have smart cars, we're going to have the smart house. And I thought, well, that's interesting. What we really need is to put all those things together, because there's a lot of synergies if they're combined. And the place where the grid and the car and the house come together is the garage.
Sure.
So we need a smart garage. That would really summarize the whole program. But the idea was integration of those resources in order to make them all more efficient and make it potentially more viable to use more renewable energy, because of the fact that you're incorporating things like the battery that stores energy on board the car together with the grid.
Okay, so you hold a PhD in energy and environmental engineering from Stanford? Oh, ho-hum.
Yeah, but I didn't make the football team, so. You know.
I think it's...
and it wasn't even very good in my day, so, you know.
It got better retrospectively.
That's right.
So I think for purposes of this discussion,
He's
ladies and
qualified.
gentlemen,
Yeah,
he's qualified. Are
yeah,
you going to say that?
It was a close call.
We have to, you know, take this under advisement.
Okay.
So, he's a lawyer, you know. In fact, they're both lawyers.
Oh,
They're surrounded
We're
by
out, we're out.
You
Oh my
are too.
So, you know, let's talk about valuing these things. I mean, it doesn't sound easy, frankly, Joel.
No, and in fact, it's not too hard on the mainland, where things are a little more stable and predictable. But in Hawaii, the problem is actually much harder, because of the fact that we have these small, isolated systems. And as soon as you know, we've begun to incorporate a significant amount of renewable sources, it makes a big impact. And suddenly you have the question of, well, are there too many renewables? And, you know, can the utility incorporate that all? Does it change the way they have to operate the system? And how does that affect the cost? And in turn, how does that affect the value that you derive from renewables? It's actually a lot harder problem.
You know, what this tells me, and we can talk about it after the break, is that when everything is on the table, when the very business models of utilities around the country is being questioned and probably changed in the next few years, this is the kind of evaluation that's critical to determining policy. That's what it tells me. How far off base am I?
Well, it's part of it. I think that the challenge is that we're used to treating these evaluations or comparisons as sort of a incremental change. You know, if I take away a little bit of fossil energy and put in a little bit of renewable, you know, how does it balance out? But now we're talking about just, you know, it's like, what's my line? I'm going to flip all the cards. Now you got a whole new game.
Yeah.
And then a one-to-one comparison starts to become, you know, almost meaningless. Yeah. And so it really is a different issue. At some point, you just say, you know, just put the pedal to the metal and go for it. And it really comes down to, you know, what are the technical requirements for making sure those resources play nice together.
Okay, we're going to
Inspired
put the
by-
pedal to the metal now, take a break. That's Joel Swisher, Director of Institute for Energy Studies in Bellingham, Washington. Fair enough to say that. Here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, and we're talking about evaluating renewables for Hawaii. Very important. We need that. We'll be right back.
Inspired by an ancient culture, classical Chinese dance, vigorous physicality, timeless stories, 5,000 years of Chinese music and dance. Shen Yun presents authentic Chinese culture. Coming to Blaisdell Concert Hall, May 8th and 9th. Tickets at shenyun.com or call 808-792-3919.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here with Joel Swisher from the Institute for Energy Studies in Bellingham, Washington. And we're here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, about evaluating renewables for Hawaii. Very important, with Sharon Moriwaki and Ray, what's the last name? Starling. Okay, Ray had a question.
No more checks for you.
Ray Starling had a question that he wanted to leave off with this. And you know, you don't have to be sworn.
Yeah, I took a look at the report that you did and the slides.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about it from your point of view. You've done this for many, many years, and things have changed dramatically, as you've said.
Just recently.
I was wondering what changes in your analysis do you have to take into account? I mean, you're using some old tools for some stuff that, old tools were never made for early on. And I'm just wondering, how did you make that transition?
Yeah.
Because you're blazing the trail. There's nobody else out there looking at where we are here in Hawaii.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm blazing the trail. I may be just putting up little markers along the way that hopefully someone comes through with a machete later and does a little more clearing. But the change is really that you just spoke to, that we've up until now kind of had the paradigm of renewable sources provide a small share of the supply, and so any change that they cause is kind of an incremental change. Maybe you're just running your current system a little bit less than you would have, or maybe you're displacing one unit that might have been built someday in the future, but you're not really changing the whole design of the grid, which is potentially the case. And in that kind of a situation, sort of all bets are off. The assumptions that we're used to using don't really apply so well. So for some of the potential scenarios or possible futures, you really have to kind of step back and really start from scratch to compare a system that's more renewables rich against one that is more of the status quo. And so, I feel like maybe that's not a very satisfactory answer because the tools we've developed to date and that have been applied fairly widely on the mainland and in other countries for that matter aren't really up to the job. But that's kind of what we're evaluating, is what can we get away with, and where is there really new work, maybe new research. Maybe there's some PhD dissertations out there, I don't know.
I think you're right on that.
Yeah.
And especially now, things look like they're not slowing down at all, or not even continuing at the same speed of change. We've got batteries, storage that's coming on the scene, and I see that as something that it's hard to get your mind around, because you've got people who can push power out, take power in, store it, and use it for their own use, or give it to the grid if that's the case. And I see so many different ways you could value that, and we need to look at those, because it's very important to the overall success of all the pieces coming together.
I hate to admit this, but I'm a little lost. Can I step you through some really basic questions?
Sure.
Okay. You're evaluating what? An element in the system. One element among many. One renewable element, for example. You're trying to assign to that element what? A dollars and cents valuation?
Yeah, what you're trying to say is, all right, I put in 1 unit of renewable supply, and because I do that, I may remove some other element that I no longer need. For example, burning fossil fuel in a thermal power plant.
Okay.
What does that save me? Okay, that's again going
so
back.
that'd be the kind of question you would answer.
That would be the easy kind of question. That's kind of where we're coming from. That's the incremental change, where if I only have the quantity of renewables, it would just displace a little bit of the fuel used in an existing power plant. I have a pretty good handle on that one. That said, there are some elements of even that part of the analysis that I think can be elaborated in a more complete and comprehensive
Take the really
way.
simple one. So you're putting a renewable in. You know how much you're putting in. You know how much it provides out. and I suppose you know the cost of the equipment. And so that's one side of the equation. The other side is, you know, you're putting in fossil fuel. You know how much that costs, at least over some period of time. And, you know, I guess the amortized or the unamortized cost of the equipment, right? And then you're seeing how much each one costs in a given defined period of time. And you're going to match those numbers, and you're going to say this costs this much X, this costs this much Y, and Y minus X equals what? The valuation of changing.
You would call that the net cost or the net benefit?
The net benefit.
Yeah.
It reduced to dollars, American dollars.
Yeah, could be
There
Canadian
it is.
dollars.
Then I needed that.
You want a bigger number, yeah.
Okay, I needed that.
Yeah.
So
But-
now,
but-
you said it got more complicated.
Yeah, it gets more complicated pretty fast. For example, the biggest term in the equation is almost always the fuel cost. So if we're using renewables and displacing fossil generation, we're using less fossil fuel. Well, that's a good thing. And so that saves money. Well, how much does it save exactly? Well, we can say how much that fuel costs today. With a little bit of analysis, we can figure out how much fuel would be used in the power plant. There's different units with different efficiencies. But then if we're thinking about our renewable energy investment, I mean, that's a 20, even longer year investment. What are we saving over that whole period? It's not necessarily the same as today, year by year by year. Does it go up? Does it go down? And even beyond the absolute level of the dollar cost, what about the variation and volatility of that cost? When I pay for the renewable resource, it's a fixed number. I amortize my loan or my lease, whatever it may be, and it's, you know, a fixed certain payment for a very long period of time. What's the fixed price that I can pay for that fuel supply? Yeah, that's the problem. It gets complicated, particularly when the markets aren't very liquid.
So what do you
to
do?
say. Well, you can try to force the market to tell you. You can say, we need to have a 10-year contract for fuel supply. And you say, well, I don't want to do that. That'll cost me too much. Well, that's the point. It's worth more to have that certainty, as we have with renewables. So maybe the renewables are worth a little bit more than if we just compare today's price. But there's also analytic approaches.
Can you get that number? Can you get that 10-year number? Or do you have to make a special model that builds in the, you know, the volatility?
Well, you can try both. To get that number, can I? No. Can you? No. Maybe if you're, you know, the electric company or the gas company, you can get those.
Because they have contracts.
They have
You
contracts.
go off their
and
contracts.
they are in those markets.
Yeah.
Now, whether they would be willing to play that game is another story, but you know, I can't really speak to that. On the other side of it, the analytic question, there are ways to make a calculation that values that uncertainty. That's what they call a Monte Carlo simulation. Monte Carlo is a fancy term. It sounds like kind of like gambling, and it is. It in a
If it
sense.
sounds like it, could be exactly that.
What it allows you to do, since we have, you know, very fast computers these days, is you figure out all of the possible variations in your future result, and you simulate them one by one by one by one according to the probability of each turning out to be the case. And so what you get is a wide range of results. You get like a bell curve type of distribution. And you say, so what is that worth compared to my single point value of the renewable resource? That's a different calculation than just saying, oh, well, you know, today I'm saving, you know, X dollars a gallon for my fuel. And so there's an analytic, you know, calculated proxy for the market value. But the market value is really what we would like to have in order to say this is what the certainty of renewable energy value is really worth. But that's hard to get.
One more thing before Ray can ask his question, and that is you referred to tools to do this. You referred to, I guess they're mathematical tools, some kind of tools, and they're not perfect, but they give you some answer. So what do you mean by tools? What is tools? A spreadsheet? Some kind of a special program with special algorithms to figure these things out? What's a tool?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's a set of algorithms. It could be a software program. It could be a really ugly spreadsheet.
Most of them are ugly. Actually.
Yeah, and in fact, there are actually ones that you can plug into a spreadsheet program like Excel. It doesn't come standard with what you buy when you purchase your computer or something. But yeah, I mean, these are things that there are textbooks, and there are math and computer science and economics.
Everything you can find.
Yeah.
Everything from every cross discipline you can imagine.
Yeah, well, that's part of what we do at the Institute for
science,
Energy Studies,
that's
is try to pull together the different disciplines that touch on energy, particularly the clean energy resources, such as renewables, energy efficiency, and so forth. And what we find is you need someone who's a little bit of a hybrid with some business and policy understanding, but then with those technical chops too.
Ray, he's talking about you.
As you're explaining, I'm thinking to myself, this thing is going to get incredibly complex, because if you really want to value the value of putting this particular renewable online, it has factors in there that affect the total grid in ways that we've never had before. Because, for instance, in my house, I've got PV on my house. I'm not there during the day, so I don't use very much power. But my power goes out the meter, goes to my neighbor, so that the electric company doesn't have to send power from a central power plant. There are line losses that occur that have to be counted, I think, in order to, because they could be 5 to 10% when you count all the efficiency losses that are accounted for, or that don't happen when you just move that kilowatt to my neighbor, because there's virtually no transmission losses that occur. And then when you add batteries that can be used to time when you do that, when you release that power, either to have it within your own house or to send it down the line to your neighbor, that time of when you do that can greatly affect the total cost to the grid to deliver that kilowatt hour. And it's mind-boggling to think that through, but I think in order to get a good handle on this, that's where we're going to have to go. Look at the total grid and assess it based on what the total grid costs are, and then decide where you're going to put this distributed energy, and where some things you can control, and others are going to happen, and you just have to take them into account.
And you're not finished, because all these factors, all these things like the deterioration along the line, you can think of more things. I bet you think of more things all day long to try to improve the analysis and catch all the variables in all directions.
Yeah, I think, though, that Joel was looking at models from elsewhere. I mean, has anybody anywhere done something like this, so that there's actually in the equation there are these variables you've got to include in your assessment? Is there anything like high level like that to say these are the kinds of things you must look at in making your assessment to value?
Yeah, I think that probably the closest analog is a couple places they've put in place what they call a value of solar tariff. Austin, Texas is one, and the state of Minnesota is another. And so they've gone through some of these different categories of costs and benefits and figured out which ones are really material in their cases. The problem is their cases are much more like that incremental situation that we talked about before. And so they don't necessarily map very accurately to Hawaii. You can use some of those methods, like what is the savings in fuel cost, for example, but some of the grid issues are much more complicated. And then where it really breaks down is really where you were talking about, Ray. When you get to the point where you have an individual separate analysis for every single site, then you're kind of all bets are off, because you really can't generalize that and say, well, the renewable resource is worth X. Because it really then becomes, so completely tailored to the site that it isn't a general, a tariff or value that you can assign to it. But for some of the higher level values, the fuel costs, this hedging value we were talking about a minute ago, of the uncertainty, things like emissions, things like the generation capacity that you're potentially avoiding, the losses, as you referred to, if you're downstream of the distribution system. Some of those things you can value with a fair degree of generality and say, well, most of the places, if you have this kind of renewable resource, maybe solar, maybe wind, maybe biofuel, it can be valued. But if you get into the nitty-gritty of having to tailor the analysis to every single site, then it's kind of prohibitive in terms of the...
Who are the organizations?
Can I make you wait for a minute while we take a break?
Sure.
Okay. It's okay with everybody?
Sure.
I guess so.
You're the boss.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, and I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week. We hope you'll join us.
Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here in a cliffhanger of a question that Ray was going to ask, and I interrupted him, and I hope he remembers the question that he was going to ask.
I still have the question. I was wondering, who out there, besides you and RMI, which I know about, who are looking at these things, and who do you collaborate with when you're talking to a peer somewhere about this? Is it just a handful, or are there a lot of people trying to wrap their arms around this?
No, it's a pretty small and, as I said, fairly geeky little tribe that works on this stuff. There's a number of consulting firms concentrated mostly on both coasts of the mainland, where some of the utilities and the utility commissions, that regulate the planning and operation of electric utilities in particular. And they have staff people, both the utilities and the regulators, and probably within that fairly small circle, this is a topic it's kind of waxed and waned in terms of the level of interest. When there was kind of a big wave of construction of power plants back about 12 years ago, there was a lot of talk about, what's the value of distributed resources as opposed to central resources. And then today then it kind of faded, and today it's picking up again because of specifically the interest in renewables, and in renewables at quantities that we hadn't really figured before. Going beyond this level of just being an incremental sort of asterisk. Now we're actually talking about material quantities of renewable power on the grid. In addition to hydroelectric, which is still on the order of 10% of the power on the mainland.
With the costs so monumental, wouldn't you think that there would be more people doing this to assess before you invest? How does that work? How are they making decisions then, if not by some analysis?
Well, that's a different question. The assess before you invest is really about the cost of the renewable equipment, and then just simply asking, what am I going to get for it? And there's a couple different ways to do that. And we're looking at one in particular, but the sort of familiar ways are, you could say, well, what if we just pay you the retail electric tariff for every kilowatt hour of renewables, what we call net energy metering? And that's really been kind of the default in the United States. And the problem is, that didn't have much effect until renewables got a little bit cheaper, and then all of a sudden it was a good deal, and we started seeing a lot of renewables, and at the same time other countries were investing. And now renewables are cheaper still, and now it seems like maybe we're overpaying, and maybe we could get more bang for the buck if we revisited that question. Meanwhile, if you look at other countries, Germany in particular, they took a different approach. They used what they call a feed-in tariff. And a feed-in tariff, it's kind of a silly name, but all it means is they just decided that they would pay X dollars per megawatt hour of renewable energy, and it was based not on the value, not on the benefit, but on the cost. They just set that number where they thought it would be enough to attract investment, and they were right. They attracted huge amounts of investment. They actually have the most solar power capability in the world, in Germany, which has less sun than Seattle. Nevertheless, they made that investment, and by being kind of the anchor tenant for solar energy, they helped drive down the cost for all of us. And now, here in Hawaii, solar energy is less expensive because all of those German consumers perhaps overpaid a little bit. But their valuation, which they've now dropped down because they don't need to pay so much, but it was based not on the benefit, but on the cost. So there's different approaches there. There's the retail tariff in net energy metering. There's the cost, which drives feed-in tariffs. And we're looking at, well, what if we paid according to the benefit? Can we figure out the benefit? Well, it's not clear if we can, but that's what we're investigating.
Well, so there'll be this meeting with the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, and you'll talk about, your evaluation techniques. But can you step us through a situation where somebody calls you and says, Joel, hi, I've been reading your CV, and I know what you do, and I want you to help me, and here's the problem, and here's what I'd like you to value, and here's how I'm going to integrate that into my policy choices. Can you give us an example of what the question might be, and how you could help them, and what kind of result they would get from your information?
Yeah, let me give you an example from the past a little bit, about 12 years ago. In California, the California Public Utility Commission wanted to say what is the value of energy efficiency savings. So when I put in my efficient air conditioner, like we talked about, or maybe my efficient lighting, I produce negawatts. I save power on the grid, and what is the value of that? And we created a whole methodology with different parts. What's the value of the energy itself? What's the value of the generating capacity and delivery capacity that goes with it? But one of the kind of tricky questions at that time was, what about emissions? What about the environmental value, and particularly CO2, greenhouse gas emissions? There were no limits and regulations or cost penalties for greenhouse gas emissions. But we said, actually, we think you should use a number, not zero. We thought that zero was not the right answer for valuing emissions, even though they weren't regulated at the time. And we put that in our report, and the California utilities said, wait a minute, how can you say this? We're not paying anything for emissions, it should be zero. And we said, well, no, think about it. Now, these efficiency programs will be in place for maybe 15 years, and over that time, given even where we were at the time, it appeared fairly likely that there would be some kind of regulation of greenhouse gases. It would then impart a value to CO2 emissions, and over that period of time, the most likely value that of the emission content of your power that you would avoid with efficiency was not zero. I mean, zero is probably the lowest possible number, actually.
You look at it from the government's point of view, from the community point of view, it can't be zero. But how in the world do you find out what it costs?
Even from the power system's point of view, well, what's the range? Would it have been $100 a ton? Probably not, for carbon. $50 a ton? Well, maybe. And so we kicked around a bunch of studies and said, well, in the middle, it looks like it's about, at the time we said, okay, $8 a ton CO2, and that translates into about half a cent a kilowatt hour for power. And then the utilities started saying, well, no, we think that's too high. We think it should only be 4. So then, it's like Winston Churchill. Now we're arguing about the price. So in effect, they accepted, our argument that it is a future cost, albeit an uncertain one. But fuel prices are uncertain in the future too. So the kind of concept that emissions have a value in the future, even though that's an uncertain value, given that it may appear to be zero today, that's still a legitimate and a realistic and perhaps even a prudent way to treat that particular
That
term.
goes to the point we were talking about before, namely that there are issues and possibilities and influences and vectors on this that we haven't even discovered yet. And your kind of analysis is open to finding new ones and getting more sophisticated all the time. Isn't that what's happening?
I don't know if you get more sophisticated, because if you try to really convince yourself that you have a right answer, if you want to get tenure publishing material on this, you're going to be really frustrated.
This is just between us, Joe.
No, but seriously, at the end of the day, you just have to say, well, we know it's not zero, and it's not some outrageously high value. What's kind of reasonable in between that is less likely to be way off? And again, you don't get tenure making an estimate like that, but you do get perhaps the parties around the table to say, oh, I can live with that. Let's move on to the next question. And hopefully that's a step in the right direction.
So we find the value, we add something in for emissions and whatnot. Now we find the value of this renewable. Okay? So what does your client, so to speak, do with that in terms of determining policy?
Well, they're the policymakers, so it's not my job to tell them that. One thing that they could do would be to base payment for delivery of renewable energy on that valuation. And they could do it in such a way that they say, okay, well, here's X cents a kilowatt hour for electricity, or X dollars a gallon for biodiesel, or what have you, and that's a fixed value, again, over 10, 20 years maybe. They could even get fancy and say, well, we'll put in advanced metering on your power system, and during certain times of the day or the year, we'll pay you a higher value, and other times less so. The trick there is you have to be very clear about making that recipe for the payment predictable over time. So even if it varies, day to day, over the whole year, you sort of know how much you're going to get, so then you can finance your system.
It's not a value, it's not a static value, then it's a system for finding value. It's like the those lanes on the highway where the toll depends on the amount of traffic, and the toll is always changing. So if this valuation is changing because you've given them the algorithm, they can determine the value as well as you can based on that algorithm, then therefore you can change the price every half hour.
An economist would love that solution. And you probably could get tenure doing that. The problem is, you really don't want to do it quite to that extreme. And here's the reason, is if that valuation floats every day, all the time, out into the future, and you really therefore cannot predict what your revenues will be, no one's going to finance your solar equipment. No one's going to finance your biofuels farm. And so that's why I say you have to have that recipe, but you have to have it predictable out into the future, so that if I can confidently analyze or simulate the performance of my photovoltaic system or my biofuel plant, and then knowing that recipe, and it's a fixed recipe over time, I can then estimate with confidence what my revenues will be, take that to the bank and say, okay, let's talk financing. If it just floats into kind of a nebulous, horizon, you could pretty much kill that whole.
So what kind of timeline do I need? 10 years? What's the amortization period that would make it marketable?
Well, for solar, the contracts are typically 20 years.
So you go.
What's the one on? Do you have a leasing program, Ray, on your PV system, or do you just buy it outright?
I bought it.
Okay, well, mine is leased in Colorado, and so it's a 20-year contract. So the firm that actually owns that equipment on my roof, they have financing over that 20-year period, and they have a fixed stream of payments from me, and incentives from the electric company that's serving there. And so it's a very stable set of revenues, even though the power, it goes up and down every day, and winter and summer, it's all different. But they know that. The sun's very predictable over the course of the year. They will produce, 2,000 hours
So
worth
they
of
could come to you
electricity.
and say, give us a 20-year projection on this. Use your magic, algorithm, give us a 20-year projection, and then we'll base our price to the customer on that.
Like I say, if the recipe is predictable, you can do that. Yeah.
Okay, Ray, we're at a
Might be.
time where you become very important. Ray always becomes important, sort of toward the end of our show. So Ray, I know this is not going to be easy, but can you try to summarize this?
Well, I think We're gonna have to ask Joel to come back, as we do many of our guests, because I haven't even gotten to the big question that I wanted to ask.
What was it?
about. It was, we're now looking at trying to use electric vehicles to further cut down on our carbon emissions with using renewable energy and the vehicles themselves as means of storage. And how do you assess that? I mean, you're going from, what used to be just a utility. Now the utility is going to be encouraging sales of their electricity, renewable electricity mostly, hopefully, to electric vehicle owners. And that is, I think Hawaii is going to be leading the charge on that, because we have the perfect place for an electric vehicle to really take hold.
Is that a summary?
Yeah.
Well, it's a
Yeah.
summary.
It's a summary next time.
It was the question that we
Decent.
want to address the next time we have you on, because it doesn't stop here.
Well, that's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, because I have an app on my phone that will actually program my car to charge at just the best time when the utility wants me to.
We all need that one.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, it never gets called. The utility isn't set up to send the signal. They have the perfect customer, the
See,
perfect
we
load,
need you
and they're
to-
not paying attention.
We need you to tell us how much that's worth to be able to do that.
And that, by the way, that's a Colorado
ultimately-
utility. I'm not saying anything about HECO there.
Well, no, I think we will get there, and hopefully
Oh.
sooner rather than later.
Well,
We're
we'll see
already-
it as a resource.
we're
and that's
already
That's
there.
where we'll be. Yeah.
Okay.
We're already there. We're at the end of the show, and
I'll
I'll put my summary. And
All
my
right,
summary
give
is,
me your
I
summary.
never thought that I could get tenure, but now I feel more confident. That's Joel Swisher. He's going to give me tenure. Okay, he's director of the Institute for Energy Studies in Washington. Here on Hawaii, the state of clean energy, we're talking about evaluating renewables for Hawaii. What a great subject. And we'll be back with more for sure. Thanks for watching. Thank you, everybody.
Aloha.